The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, the kind that catches the light when you turn it in your hands. My daughter Madison had chosen the most expensive option from the stationery store. Of course, she had. I'd taught her that quality matters. What I hadn't expected was to find my name on the outer envelope with a small handwritten note. Family seating to be determined day of. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I should have recognized the warning sign right then. But when it comes to our children, hope has a way of blinding us to the truth. Please join us in celebrating the marriage of Madison Elizabeth Mitchell and Ethan James Reynolds. I ran my finger across the embossed letters, feeling a strange heaviness settle in my chest. 28 years of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and midnight comfort after nightmares had led to this moment. A moment I was apparently not guaranteed a front row seat for. I set the invitation on my kitchen counter and gazed out at the Portland skyline from my living room window. The Willamette River glittered in the distance, unchanged by my small human dramas. I'd built my life here brick by brick after the divorce, turning a struggling two-person consultancy into Evergreen Solutions, now one of the Northwest's premier tech advisory firms. I'd done it all while raising Madison alone, making sure she never felt the financial strain that had marked my own childhood. Now it seemed I was family seating to be determined. I first met Ethan Reynolds 3 years ago when Madison brought him to Sunday brunch at my home. She'd never introduced me to any of her previous boyfriends, so I knew immediately this one was different. He arrived in a cashmere sweater and driving a car that cost more than my first house, all polished confidence and practiced charm. "Mrs. Mitchell," he'd said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Madison has told me so much about you." "Eleanor, please," I corrected, taking his hand. Mrs. Mitchell was my mother-in-law, and neither of us would want me carrying that title. He laughed appropriately, but I caught the way his eyes swept across my home, assessing, calculating. I recognized that look because I'd spent years perfecting it myself, sizing up potential clients, competitors, acquisitions. I knew in that moment that Ethan Reynolds wasn't just dating my daughter. He was evaluating a merger. Madison was radiant beside him, her hand perpetually touching his arm, her eyes checking his expression after every comment she made. I recognized that look too, though not from business. It was the look I'd once given her father, back when I believed love could conquer fundamental incompatibilities. "Mom runs Evergreen Solutions," Madison told him over mimosas. "She built it from nothing after she and Dad split." "Impressive," Ethan said, nodding. "Boutique consulting firms are having a moment. Have you considered taking on investors? My father knows several people at Pinnacle Ventures who might be interested." "I prefer maintaining control of my company," I replied, cutting into my eggs Benedict. "But I appreciate the thought." "Control is important," he agreed, "until it becomes a limitation." The conversation moved on, but something in his phrasing lingered with me. There was subtext there, a challenge perhaps, or a warning. After they left, I stood at my kitchen sink, washing dishes and looking out at my garden where cherry blossoms were just beginning to bloom. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "How did it go with Prince Charming?" I dried my hands and typed back, "Jury's still out. He seems to think I should sell off my life's work to his father's friends." Her response came quickly. Red flag or just typical rich boy syndrome? I paused, considering. Too soon to tell, but Madison looks at him like he hung the moon. "Then we hope for the best and prepare for the worst," Olivia replied, adding a wine glass emoji. "Drink this week?" We met at the Harbor View that Thursday, securing a table by the windows where the sunset painted the water in shades of pink and gold. Olivia had been my friend since we were assigned as roommates our freshman year of college. She'd been there through my marriage, the birth of Madison, the bitter divorce, and every triumph and failure in between. "So," she said after ordering a bottle of Cabernet, "tell me everything." "There's not much to tell yet," I replied. "He's from one of those families where wealth is an heirloom passed down through generations. The kind of people who have summer houses with names." "And how does Madison fit into that world?" I sighed, watching the waiter pour deep red liquid into my glass. "Like she was born for it. You know she's always had that ability to adapt to any environment. Remember how easily she moved between my apartment and Richard's mansion during the custody arrangements?" Olivia nodded. "Social chameleon. But that doesn't mean she's happy." "She seems happy," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if that was true or just what I wanted to believe. "Ethan certainly offers her the material comforts she grew up without when she was with me." "Eleanor," Olivia said firmly, "you gave that girl everything. Maybe not luxury vacations or designer clothes, but you gave her stability, education, and most importantly, an example of what true strength looks like. Don't rewrite history because her boyfriend has a trust fund." I smiled gratefully at my friend. "I know. It's just hard not to wonder if I could have done more." "More than working 80-hour weeks while attending every soccer game? More than taking out a second mortgage to send her to that arts program in New York? More than postponing your own dreams so she could chase hers?" Olivia shook her head. "No one has ever loved that girl more thoroughly than you have." The engagement came 6 months later. Madison didn't tell me herself. I learned about it when she posted the ring photo on Instagram. A 5-carat diamond that must have cost more than most people's annual salary. The caption read, "Forever begins with our Ethan Reynolds, future Mrs. Reynolds." I stared at the image for a long time, trying to reconcile the Madison I knew, the girl who once made me birthday cards from construction paper and glitter, with this stranger who hadn't even called her mother before announcing her engagement to the world. When I finally reached her by phone, her voice was breathless with excitement. "Isn't it amazing, Mom? We're thinking about a spring wedding at Cedar Ridge Estate. It's usually booked 2 years in advance, but Ethan's mother knows, the owners." "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said, pushing down the hurt. "I'm so happy for you. When can we get together to celebrate?" "Oh, things are crazy right now. Ethan's parents are throwing us an engagement party at the Cascade Country Club next weekend. You'll get an invitation, of course." The invitation arrived 3 days later. Again, expensive cardstock that felt heavy with significance. The party was being hosted by Mr. and Mrs. James Reynolds, and the dress code specified formal attire. At the bottom, in smaller print, "Kindly RSVP to the wedding coordinator." A wedding coordinator for the engagement party. I bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep emerald silk that Olivia assured me brought out my eyes and projected quiet confidence. "You're not just any mother of the bride," she reminded me as we shopped. "You're Eleanor Mitchell, CEO. Don't let these people make you forget that." The Cascade Country Club was a monument to old money, with its stone facade and perfectly manicured grounds. Valets in crisp uniforms whisked away cars, and staff in black tie directed guests to a ballroom overlooking the golf course. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, and arrangements of white roses and hydrangeas adorned every surface. I spotted Madison immediately, a vision in a white cocktail dress, her arm linked with Ethan's as they greeted guests. She looked happy, yes, but also different somehow, more polished, less spontaneous. She'd straightened her naturally curly hair and was wearing makeup that made her look older than her 28 years. "Mom," she exclaimed when she saw me, detaching from Ethan to give me a quick hug. "You look beautiful. Have you met Ethan's parents?" Before I could answer, she was already guiding me toward a distinguished-looking couple holding court near the champagne fountain. James Reynolds had silver hair and the relaxed posture of someone who has never worried about money a day in his life. His wife, Victoria, was a carefully preserved blonde whose smile didn't disturb her Botox. "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds," Madison said. "This is my mother, Eleanor Mitchell." James extended his hand. "Ah, the businesswoman. Ethan mentioned you run some sort of tech support company." "Consulting firm," I corrected gently. "Evergreen Solutions provides strategic advisory services to technology companies throughout the Pacific Northwest." "How fascinating," Victoria said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Madison, darling, the Whitmores just arrived. We simply must say hello." She swept my daughter away without another word to me, leaving me standing awkwardly with James. "Madison is a lovely girl," he said after a moment. "Not quite what we envisioned for Ethan, of course, but he seems quite taken with her." I felt a flash of anger but maintained my professional smile. "Yes, she is lovely, and accomplished in her own right. She graduated summa cum laude from Barnard before earning her master's at Stanford." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yes, James nodded absently. "Education is important, certainly, though in our family, connections have always mattered more than credentials. I'm sure she'll adjust to our way of life eventually." Before I could respond, he too drifted away, leaving me alone in a room full of strangers who clearly viewed my daughter as an unexpected and somewhat questionable addition to their rarefied world. I made my way to the bar, ordering a scotch rather than the champagne being circulated on silver trays. As I took my first sip, I felt someone approach. "You must be Madison's mother," said a voice beside me. I turned to find a woman about my age with kind eyes and a wry smile. "I'm Caroline Bennett, Ethan's aunt, James's sister. I believe we're the only people in this room who have ever filed our own taxes." I laughed, surprised and grateful for the moment of genuine connection. Eleanor Mitchell. And yes, I not only file my own taxes, but run my own business. "I know," she nodded. "I looked up Evergreen Solutions after Ethan announced the engagement. Impressive work, especially breaking into that sector as a woman in the 90s. "Thank you," I said, warming to her. It wasn't easy, but necessity is a powerful motivator. Caroline glanced around the room, then lowered her voice. "Word of advice from someone who knows this family all too well. Don't let them make you feel small. The Reynolds have plenty of money, but not nearly as much substance as they pretend." Before she could say more, a bell chimed, signaling that dinner was about to be served. Staff appeared with seating cards, directing guests to assigned tables. I was led to the far corner of the room, at a table with distant cousins and work associates, while Madison sat at the head table with Ethan and his parents. Throughout dinner, I watched my daughter laughing and conversing with her future in-laws, seemingly at ease in a world that had been designed to exclude people like us. I felt a complicated mix of pride and concern. Had I raised her to be adaptable, or had I somehow taught her that her worth depended on the approval of others? When the speeches began, James Reynolds raised his glass first. "When Ethan was born," he began, "I started a tradition of writing him a letter each year on his birthday, offering wisdom for the journey ahead. In one such letter, when he was about 10, I wrote, 'Choose a partner who enhances your family legacy rather than merely benefiting from it.' I wasn't sure he'd taken that advice to heart until I met Madison." He paused, smiling at my daughter. "While she comes from a different background than ours, she has shown a remarkable ability to embrace the Reynolds way of life. Victoria and I look forward to helping shape her into a true member of our family." I gripped my napkin under the table, knuckles white with tension. Shape her? As if my daughter were clay to be molded according to their specifications? As if the woman I'd raised, intelligent, compassionate, driven, needed to be reformed to meet their standards? When Madison stood to speak, I held my breath, hoping to see some flicker of the independent spirit I'd always admired in her. "Thank I. You all for being here," she began, her voice steady and practiced. "Especially the Reynolds family, who have welcomed me with such generosity and guidance. I know I have so much to learn about the traditions and responsibilities that come with joining such a distinguished family." She turned to Ethan, her expression softening. "Ethan, you've opened doors for me I never imagined walking through. I promise to be the partner you deserve and to always honor the Reynolds name." Not once did she mention me, or her life before. Ethan. It was as if her history began the moment he slipped that enormous diamond onto her finger. After the speeches, as guests mingled over dessert, I found Madison alone for a brief moment as she returned from the ladies' room. "Lovely party," I said, trying to keep my tone light, though I was a bit surprised by some of James's comments. Madison's smile tightened. "What do you mean?" "The part about shaping you to fit the family. You don't find that condescending?" She glanced around nervously as if worried someone might overhear. "Mom, that's just how they talk. They don't mean anything by it." "And what about your speech? You didn't mention your own family once." A flash of irritation crossed her face. "It wasn't about you, Mom. This is my engagement, my future." "Of course it is," I said, feeling a distance opening between us that had nothing to do with physical space. "I just want to make sure you're not losing yourself in their world." "I'm not losing myself," she said firmly. "I'm evolving. This is who I am now." She touched my arm briefly. "I need to get back to Ethan. We'll talk more later, okay?" But later didn't come that night, nor in the weeks that followed as wedding planning consumed every aspect of Madison's life. When we did speak, it was almost exclusively about logistics. Whether I'd be bringing a +1, I wouldn't. Whether I'd be wearing blue or purple, neither clashed with the wedding colors. Whether I had any dietary restrictions for the reception, I didn't. Not once did she ask for my input on meaningful aspects of the ceremony, though I later learned she'd spent countless hours with Victoria Reynolds selecting everything from the floral arrangements to the precise shade of napkins. 3 months. Before the wedding, Madison called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice tense. "Mom, I need to ask you something important." "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" "Ethan and I have been finalizing our budget and, well, traditionally the bride's family covers certain expenses." I waited, sensing where this was heading but wanting her to have the courage to ask directly. "The ceremony and reception at Cedar Ridge will cost about $75,000, she continued when I didn't immediately respond, "plus another $30,000 for the rehearsal dinner, which the Reynolds are covering. We were hoping you might be able to contribute." Despite anticipating this request, hearing the actual figures took my breath away. Over $100,000 for a single weekend. More than I'd spent on Madison's entire college education. "That's quite a substantial amount," I said carefully. "Have you considered scaling back to something more reasonable?" She made a small, frustrated sound. "Mom, this is my wedding. It's supposed to be special." "Special doesn't have to mean extravagant, Madison. When did you become someone who needs to spend the price of a house on a single day?" "This isn't about the money," she snapped. "It's about what's appropriate for someone marrying into the Reynolds family. Their connections will be there. Important people who could benefit your business too, by the way." I felt a chill at her words. "I don't need to buy access to clients, Madison. I've built my business on merit and hard work." "That's so old-fashioned," she said dismissively. "Everyone networks. Everyone leverages connections. That's how the real world works." "That may be how their world works," I replied, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "It's not how I taught you to operate." Silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken accusations. "So you won't help," she finally said, her tone flat. I took a deep breath. I didn't say that. I'm happy to contribute what I can, but I need to be practical about what I can afford. Fine, Madison said, the word clipped and cold. Sophia will send you the vendor contracts. Just let her know what you're willing to cover. The wedding coordinator, Sophia Williams, emailed me the next day with a spreadsheet itemizing costs that made my head spin. $12,000 for flowers, $8,000 for the cake, $20,000 for a photographer and videographer. Each line item represented more money than most families had to live on for months. Against my better judgment, I agreed to cover the venue and catering costs, $75,000 that would come from my retirement savings. It wasn't financially prudent, but some irrational part of me hoped the gesture would bridge the growing gap between Madison and me. I transferred the money directly to Cedar Ridge Estate, ensuring it would be used as intended rather than absorbed into the general wedding fund where the Reynolds might direct it elsewhere. The confirmation email from the venue manager included a personal note. Thank you for your generous payment, Ms. Mitchell. Cedar Ridge Estate is now fully reserved for the Mitchell-Reynolds wedding. I forwarded the confirmation to Sophia and Madison, adding, venue and catering now paid in full. Looking forward to the big day. Madison's response was brief. Thanks, Sophia will be in touch about rehearsal details. As the wedding approached, I found myself increasingly sidelined in the preparations. Madison scheduled her final dress fitting when she knew I had an important client meeting. The bridal shower, organized by Victoria Reynolds, was held at a time that conflicted with a conference I'd committed to months earlier. It's almost like she's trying to exclude you, Olivia observed over coffee 2 weeks before the wedding. Or she's just busy, I said, trying to be fair. Wedding planning is stressful. No, Olivia shook her head firmly. This is something else. The Madison I know would never treat you this way. It's like she's trying to erase her past, erase you, to fit into his world. I stared into my coffee cup, unwilling to voice the same fear that had been growing in my own heart. She'll come back to herself after the wedding, I said, more to convince myself than Olivia. Once the pressure is off. And if she doesn't? I had no answer. The rehearsal dinner was held at the Laurel Hotel in a private dining room with views of Mount Hood in the distance. Again, I found myself seated far from the main table, sandwiched between a college friend of Ethan's who worked in finance and barely spoke to me, and an elderly aunt who kept confusing me with the wedding planner. I watched Madison circulate through the room, stopping to chat with each table, except mine. She was playing the role of gracious bride perfectly, but there was something performative about her animation, as if she were an actress who had studied how to portray happiness, without actually feeling it. When she finally approached my table, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Mom, I'm so glad you could make it. I wouldn't miss it, I said, standing to hug her. She returned the embrace briefly before pulling away. Everything looks beautiful. Thanks to Victoria, Madison said. She has impeccable taste. And the wedding tomorrow. Is everything ready? As ready as it can be. She glanced over her shoulder, where Ethan was gesturing for her to join him. I should get back. The toast will be starting soon. Madison, I said, catching her hand before she could leave. Are you happy, sweetheart? Truly happy. Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe, or a flash of her former self breaking through the polished veneer. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Of course I'm happy, she said, her voice tight. Why wouldn't I be? Before I could respond, she was gone, slipping back into the role of future Mrs. Reynolds with practiced ease. The toasts that followed were predictable paeans to the Reynolds family legacy and Ethan's many accomplishments. James spoke at length about his son's promising future at the family investment firm. Victoria discussed the importance of their family traditions and her excitement about passing them on to the next generation. When it came time for the bride's family to speak, I rose from my seat, note cards in hand. I'd prepared a thoughtful reflection on Madison's childhood, her determination and intelligence, the pride I felt watching her grow into an independent woman. But as I approached the microphone, Sophia, the wedding planner, intercepted me. "Actually," she whispered, "we're running behind schedule. We'll need to cut this toast to keep on track." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Excuse me?" "The Reynolds have a hard stop at 9, she explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mr. Reynolds has an early flight tomorrow for a quick business matter before the ceremony." I looked past her to the head table, where Madison was deep in conversation, with Victoria, seemingly unaware of what was happening. Ethan, however, was watching the exchange with a small, satisfied smile that made my blood run cold. "I see," I said quietly, tucking my note cards back into my purse. "By all means, keep to the schedule." I returned to my seat, cheeks burning with humiliation. The elderly aunt beside me patted my hand sympathetically. "Politics," she said, though I wasn't entirely sure she understood what had just happened. Always politics with these events. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I made polite conversation, ate the exquisite food without tasting it, and declined a third glass of wine, knowing I would need my wits about me for the following day. When it was finally appropriate to leave, I made my way to Madison to say goodnight. She was standing with Ethan and his parents, laughing at something James had said. I approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude. "Madison, I'm heading out," I said when there was a pause in the conversation. "Early day tomorrow." "Oh, right," she said, barely glancing at me. "See you at the venue. I'll be getting ready in the bridal suite with Victoria and the bridesmaids." Another exclusion, another small cut. I had assumed I would help my daughter prepare for her wedding, as my own mother had helped me. But clearly that tradition, like so many others, had been sacrificed on the altar of Reynolds' family approval. "Good night, then," I said, forcing a smile. "Good night, Ethan, Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds." As I turned to leave, James called after me. "Eleanor, a moment?" I paused, turning back. "Yes?" "Victoria and I wanted to thank you for your contribution to the festivities." His tone made it clear he found the amount inadequate. "We've taken the liberty of supplementing where necessary to ensure the event meets the standards our guests will expect." "How generous of you," I replied, my professional mask firmly in place, though I believe my contribution covered the venue and catering costs in full. "The venue, yes," Victoria cut in smoothly. "But there were numerous upgrades required after the initial booking. Better linens, enhanced lighting, premium bar options, standard adjustments." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further without saying something I would regret. With a final glance at Madison, who was studying her engagement ring rather than meeting my eyes, I left the rehearsal dinner with a heavy heart and the growing certainty that I was losing my daughter to a world that would never truly value her for herself. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and allowed myself a moment of rare vulnerability. Silent tears slid down my cheeks as I mourned not just the relationship I was losing with Madison, but the values I had apparently failed to instill in her. Where was the strong, independent woman I thought I'd raised? The girl who once told me she would never define herself through someone else's expectations? My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. How bad was it? I considered downplaying the odd evening, knowing my friend would be indignant on my behalf. But I was tired of pretending everything was fine, when it so clearly wasn't. "Worse than expected," I typed back. "They wouldn't even let me give a toast." Her response was immediate. "Those entitled, manipulative snobs. Please tell me you're not still paying for half the wedding." "Too late," I replied. "Money's already transferred." "And Madison? How is she handling all this?" I paused, fingers hovering over the screen. How could I explain that my daughter seemed to be actively participating in my exclusion? that she appeared to have traded her identity for acceptance into a world that would never truly see her value. "She's becoming someone I don't recognize," I finally wrote, "and I don't know how to bring her back." Olivia's response was gentle but firm. "You can't force her to see what she's not ready to acknowledge. All you can do is be there when the bubble bursts. And Eleanor, it will burst. Families like the Reynolds only tolerate outsiders as long as they stay in their assigned roles." I knew she was right, but it provided little comfort as I prepared for bed, setting my alarm for the wedding day that loomed ahead, a day that should have been a joyful celebration, but now felt more like an elaborate performance in which I'd been cast as an unwelcome extra. Morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect late spring day that wedding planners dream about. I dressed carefully in the outfit I'd chosen months ago, a dove gray silk suit that Madison had actually approved of during one of our increasingly rare shopping trips together. The ceremony wasn't until 2 o'clock, but I arrived at Cedar Ridge Estate early, hoping to see Madison before she was swept up in pre-wedding activities. The estate was already bustling with staff arranging chairs on the manicured lawn and florists, transforming the pergola into a flower-draped altar. I approached a harried-looking assistant who was checking items off a clipboard. "Excuse me, could you direct me to the bridal suite? I'm the mother of the bride." She glanced up, consulting her list. "Mitchell family?" "Yes, Eleanor Mitchell." She ran her finger down the page, frowning slightly. "I don't see you on the pre-ceremony access list. Only the Reynolds family and the bridal party are authorized at this time." I stared at her, struggling to maintain my composure. "There must be some mistake. I'm Madison's mother." "I understand," she said, her tone suggesting she'd dealt with difficult relatives before. "But I can only go by the list I've been given. The general guest entrance will open at 1:30. You're welcome to wait in the garden pavilion until then." Dismissed to wait with the general guests. On my daughter's wedding day, in the venue I had paid for. I considered arguing further, but knew it would only create a scene that would ultimately distress Madison. Instead, I nodded stiffly and made my way to the garden pavilion, a small structure overlooking a koi pond where early arrivals could enjoy refreshments before the ceremony. I took a seat on a stone bench, watching the final preparations unfold across the grounds. Staff in black uniforms arranged delicate white chairs in perfect rows. Florists hung garlands of roses and greenery from ancient oak trees. A string quartet set up near the ceremony site, tuning their instruments. All of it beautiful. All of it paid for with my life savings. And I was sitting alone, an outsider at my own daughter's wedding. As the pavilion began to fill with other guests, I maintained my composure through sheer force of will. I smiled and made small talk, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, and pretended not to notice the curious glances from those who knew I was the mother of the bride. At 1:30, we were led to the ceremony site and directed to our seats. I was shown to the back row on the bride's side, far from the front where parents traditionally sat. From my position, I would barely be able to see Madison's face as she took her vows. I sat down, hands folded in my lap as other guests filed in around me. An older gentleman took the seat beside me, giving me a friendly nod. "Beautiful day for a wedding," he commented. "Yes," I agreed, voice carefully neutral. "Perfect." "Friend of the bride or groom?" "The bride," I said after a moment's hesitation. "I'm her mother." His eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Her mother? Then why are you seated all the way back here?" I had no answer that wouldn't reveal the painful rift that had opened between Madison and me. Before I could formulate a response, the string quartet began playing, signaling the start of the ceremony. The procession began. Bridesmaids in pale, blue dresses walked slowly down the aisle, followed by Ethan's young cousin as flower girl. Ethan and his groomsmen took their places at the altar, handsome in tailored tuxedos. And then, the music changed to the traditional wedding march, and everyone rose to their feet. Madison appeared at the end of the aisle on James Reynolds's arm. Not her father, who hadn't been invited, but her future father-in-law. She was radiant in a gown that must have cost thousands, her hair swept up in an elegant style I had never seen her wear before. As she passed my row, her eyes briefly met mine. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even regret. But she quickly looked away, focusing her attention on Ethan waiting at the altar. The ceremony proceeded with all the pomp and circumstance the Reynolds family had paid for, or rather, that I had paid for. The minister spoke of union and partnership, of two families joining together, while I sat alone in the back row, watching my daughter pledge herself to a man who seemed to value her as an acquisition rather than a partner. When it came time for the rings, Victoria Reynolds stepped forward to present them, another traditional mother-of-the-bride role that had been taken from me. I felt each slight like a physical wound, but maintained my dignity, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. After the ceremony, guests were directed to the cocktail hour on the terrace while the wedding party took photographs. Again, I found myself adrift, making polite conversation with distant acquaintances while the Reynolds family and their friends clustered in tight groups, occasionally glancing my way with thinly veiled curiosity. Caroline Bennett, Ethan's aunt who had been kind to me at the engagement party, approached with 2 glasses of champagne, offering one to me. "You look like you could use this," she said quietly. "That obvious?" I asked, accepting the glass, gratefully. "Only to someone who knows how these people operate." She clinked her glass against mine. "For what it's worth, I think you've handled yourself with remarkable grace." "Thank you," I said, taking a sip of the excellent champagne, though I'm not sure what else I could have done. Caroline's expression turned serious. "You could have refused to pay for any of this. Most mothers would have, after being treated as you have been." I looked at her in surprise. "You know about that?" "James isn't exactly subtle when he's feeling superior. He made sure everyone knew he had to rescue the wedding from financial constraints." She shook her head in disgust. "What he failed to mention was that you covered the most significant expenses." Before I could respond, a bell chimed, signaling guests to move to the reception tent for dinner. Caroline squeezed my arm supportively before we parted ways, heading to our assigned tables. Once again, I found myself seated at the furthest table. From the head table, surrounded by Madison's former college roommates and their +1s, none of whom I had met before today. Across the tent, Madison sat with Ethan, his parents, and the bridal party, laughing and chatting as if she'd been born into their world. The toasts began after the first course. James Reynolds spoke at length about welcoming Madison into their family, making several pointed comments about elevating her opportunities and polishing her potential. Victoria spoke next, thanking guests for joining them in embracing this new addition to the Reynolds legacy. Throughout both speeches, Madison smiled and nodded, occasionally glancing at Ethan for approval. Not once did she look in my direction, not even when James made a joke about her humble beginnings. When the best man finished his toast, Sophia, the wedding planner, approached the microphone. "And now we invite everyone to enjoy their dinner while the band begins our evenings." Entertainment. No mention of the mother of the bride speaking. No acknowledgement of my role in Madison's life or in making this day possible. Something inside me finally snapped. I stood up slowly, champagne glass in hand, and made my way deliberately to the center of the tent. Conversations hushed as guests noticed my movement. By the time I reached the dance floor, the room had fallen silent. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I believe there's been an oversight in the program." Sophia hurried toward me, clearly flustered. "Ms. Mitchell, we're on a very tight schedule." I turned to address the room, ignoring her. "For those who don't know me, I'm Eleanor Mitchell, Madison's mother. In all the excitement today, there seemed to have been several." I stood there, glass in hand, heart pounding as every eye in the reception tent turned toward me. The string quartet's music faded to silence. In the front row, Victoria Reynolds' smile hardened into a grimace while her husband James straightened, his posture clearly annoyed at this unexpected interruption. "As I was saying," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "I'm Eleanor Mitchell, Madison's mother, and while I wasn't included in the official program, I believe I have earned the right to say a few words at my only daughter's wedding." Madison's face had drained of color. She gripped Ethan's arm, her knuckles white, her expression fluctuating between embarrassment and alarm. But I noticed something else there too, a flicker of the girl I had raised, the one who valued honesty and straightforwardness, no matter how uncomfortable. "First, I want to congratulate Madison and Ethan," I said, raising my glass slightly. "Marriage is a profound commitment, one that requires both partners to see and value each other authentically." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the lavish decorations surrounding us, the towering centerpieces, the hand-calligraphed place cards, the custom-woven linens that had been deemed so essential. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge the beautiful venue we're enjoying today. Cedar Ridge Estate is truly spectacular, isn't it? The kind of place that creates lasting memories. I took a small sip of champagne before continuing. Which is why I was so happy to personally cover the entire cost of renting this estate, all $75,000 of it, as well as the catering for every person in this tent. A murmur rippled through the crowd. At the head table, James Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Victoria's artificial smile froze completely. "I mention this not to boast," I clarified, "but because it seems there's been some confusion about my role here today. Despite funding the venue and food for this celebration, I was seated in the back row during my daughter's ceremony. I was excluded from the bridal preparations. I wasn't permitted to give a toast at the rehearsal dinner. And until this moment, I was denied the opportunity to speak at the reception." The whispers around the room grew louder. I caught Caroline Bennett's eye from across the tent. She gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. "Now, I understand the desire to create a certain image," I continued. "The Reynolds family has a reputation to maintain, after all. But in the process of cultivating that perfect appearance, something important was forgotten. Something authentic." I turned directly to Madison, my voice softening. "Maddie, before you became the future Mrs. Reynolds, you were Madison Mitchell, my daughter. A brilliant, independent young woman who never needed anyone else's name or fortune to make her exceptional." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw recognition there, as if the real Madison was fighting to break through the polished facade she'd constructed. "I didn't build a successful business from nothing so that you could be treated as less than worthy by anyone. I didn't work 80-hour weeks while attending every school event so you could be molded into someone else's idea of acceptable. I raised you to know your own value, not to derive it from others' perceptions." A single tear slid down Madison's cheek. Beside her, Ethan's expression had darkened from annoyance to barely concealed anger. "So, while I'm delighted to help give you the wedding day you wanted," I concluded, "I refuse to be relegated to the background of your life because someone else finds my presence inconvenient or my background insufficient. I love you too much to pretend that's okay." I raised my glass one final time. "To the bride and groom, may your marriage be built on mutual respect, honesty, and the courage to be yourselves, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the tent, a single person began to applaud. Others joined in, slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm until most of the guests were clapping, though the Reynolds side remained notably still. I set my glass down on the nearest table, nodded once to the stunned wedding planner, and made my way back toward my assigned seat with as much dignity as I could muster. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I kept my head high, refusing to show how deeply the day's events had wounded me. Before I could reach my table, Madison was suddenly beside me, her hand catching my arm. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can we talk? Privately?" I nodded, allowing her to guide me out of the tent and into the small bridal cottage where she'd prepared for the ceremony. As soon as the door closed behind us, she turned to face me, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with tears. "Why did you do that?" she demanded, though the question lacked real anger. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." "Did I?" I asked quietly. "Or did I simply state the truth about how I've been treated today? About how you've allowed me to be treated?" Madison sank onto a velvet settee, the voluminous skirt of her wedding gown billowing around her. "It's so much more complicated than you understand, Mom. The Reynolds have expectations, traditions." "Traditions that include erasing your mother from your wedding day?" I interrupted, sitting down beside her. "Maddie, look at me. Really. Look at me. Do you even recognize what you've become?" She met my gaze, her eyes swimming with tears. "I'm trying to fit into their world. Do you have any idea how hard that is? How constantly I'm being judged and found wanting." "Then why marry into it?" I asked gently. The Madison I raised would never accept being diminished, no matter how prestigious the company or how large the bank account. "Because I love Ethan," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. She looked down at her hands, at the enormous diamond that seemed to weigh down her slender finger. "At least I thought I did. Now I don't know what I feel anymore." "Tell me what happened," I said, taking her hand in mine. "When did things change between us? When did I become someone to be hidden away rather than honored on your wedding day?" Madison was quiet for a long moment, her breathing uneven as she struggled to compose herself. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was gradual. After the engagement, Victoria started taking me to lunches, teaching me about the Reynolds way of doing things. At first, it was little comments about my clothes, my hair, the way I spoke. Then it became suggestions about distancing myself from my previous life to fully embrace my new one." She looked up at me, guilt written across her features. She said if I wanted to be accepted by their circle, I needed to present a unified front with Ethan's family. That meant prioritizing their traditions over ours. "And Ethan?" I prompted. "What did he say about all this?" "He agreed. With his mother," Madison admitted, a note of shame creeping into her voice. "He said his family's connections were vital to our future, and that making them happy was more important than considering your feelings." Each word was like a knife to my heart, but I forced myself to remain calm. "And you went along with it?" She nodded miserably. "At first I tried to find compromises, but every time I stood up for you, or for myself, there was this subtle punishment. Invitations would be rescinded. Ethan would become distant. Victoria would make these cutting remarks about my background." "So you chose the path of least resistance," I said, neither judging nor absolving her. "I told myself it was temporary." Madison continued. "That once we were married, once I was officially a Reynolds, I'd have more leverage to be myself again, to reconnect with you. I just needed to get through the wedding." I studied my daughter's face, the face I had watched change from infancy to adulthood, through every joy and sorrow life had brought her. Despite the expensive makeup and carefully styled hair, I could still see the little girl who had once declared she would never let anyone tell her who to be. "Maddie," I said softly, "is that really the foundation you want to build your marriage on? Hiding who you are? Cutting off the people who love you unconditionally? Always adjusting yourself to meet someone else's approval?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens where her wedding guests were now milling about, sipping champagne and pretending nothing unusual had happened. "I've made such a mess of everything," she finally said, her shoulders slumping. "I don't even know how to fix it." "You start by remembering who you are," I told her, joining her at the window. "Not who they want you to be, but who you know yourself to be." A knock at the door interrupted us. Without waiting for a response, Ethan entered, his handsome face tight with barely controlled anger. "There you are," he said to Madison, pointedly ignoring me. "Everyone's waiting. Your mother's little speech has already disrupted the schedule. Enough." I watched my daughter carefully, curious to see how she would respond. For a moment, she seemed to shrink under his disapproval, falling back into the pattern of seeking his validation. But then something shifted in her expression. A hardening of resolve, a straightening of her spine. "Our guests can wait a few more minutes," she said, her voice stronger than it had been moments before. "I'm talking to my mother." Ethan's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Now isn't the time for family drama, Madison. My parents are furious. And frankly, so am I. How could you let her cause a scene like that?" "A scene?" I echoed incredulously. "Is that what you call it when someone speaks the truth about how they've been treated?" "Nobody asked for your input," Ethan snapped, finally acknowledging my presence. "This is between me and my wife." "She's not your wife yet," I reminded him calmly. "And any man who would deliberately exclude his future mother-in-law from her daughter's wedding day doesn't deserve to be anybody's husband." Madison stepped between us, her expression resolute. "Ethan, I need you to leave. I'll be out when I've finished my conversation with my mother." He stared at her in disbelief. "You can't be serious. After everything my family has done for you, you're taking her side?" "I'm not taking sides," Madison replied. "I'm making a choice to have a private conversation without being rushed or criticized for it." Ethan's face flushed with anger. "Fine. Have your little heart-to-heart. But when you're done, I expect you to come out there and smooth things over with my parents. Make it clear that your mother's outburst doesn't reflect our views." The door closed behind him with more force than necessary, leaving Madison and me in a charged silence. "That's the man you want to spend your life with?" I asked quietly. "Someone who speaks to you that way? Who sees my presence in your life as an inconvenience to be managed?" Madison returned to the settee, sinking down with the weight of recognition in her eyes. He wasn't always like this. Or maybe he was, and I just didn't want to see it. She looked up at me, vulnerability written across her face. "Mom, what am I supposed to do now? Everyone is out there waiting. The Reynolds have invited half of Portland's elite. If I change my mind now, then you'll be the woman who was brave enough to choose herself over appearances," I said, sitting beside her and taking her hands in mine. "Yes, people will talk. Yes, it will be uncomfortable. But those things are temporary. Marrying the wrong person, committing your life to someone who doesn't truly value you, that's the kind of mistake that can define decades." "I don't know if I have that kind of courage," she whispered. "You do," I assured her. "You're my daughter. You were raised to stand on your own 2 feet and make decisions based on your own judgment, not others' expectations." She was quiet for a long moment, her thumbs absently turning the enormous diamond on her left hand. Then, with a deep breath, she slipped the ring off and placed it on the small side table. "I need to talk to Ethan," she said, her voice steadier than it had been all day. "Alone. Would you wait for me here?" I nodded, both proud and concerned. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." Madison squared her shoulders and walked out of the cottage, closing the door softly behind her. Through the window, I watched her cross the lawn toward the main house, where I presumed Ethan had retreated. Her white gown gleamed in the late afternoon sunlight, making her look almost ethereal against the vibrant green of the estate grounds. Alone in the cottage, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this moment. I had raised Madison to be independent, to think critically, to value substance over appearance. Yet somewhere along the way, she had begun to measure her worth through others' perceptions, particularly those of the Reynolds family. Had I somehow failed her? Had my own ambition, my focus on building my business, created a void that she was now trying to fill with external validation? Or was this simply part of her own journey, a detour she needed to take before finding her way back to her authentic self? The minutes stretched into an hour. Outside, I could see guests becoming restless, checking watches and phones. The wedding planner was moving frantically between groups, clearly trying to maintain some semblance of the carefully orchestrated schedule. James Reynolds was engaged in what appeared to be a heated conversation with the venue manager, gesturing emphatically toward the reception tent. Finally, the cottage door opened, and Madison entered. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. The enormous engagement ring was still absent from her hand. "It's done," she said simply, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion behind it. "I told Ethan I can't marry him. Not today. Not like this." I stood, moving toward her cautiously. "Are you all right?" A small, sad smile touched her lips. "No, but I will be." She took a deep breath. He didn't take it well, said I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I'd regret throwing away everything his family could offer me. "And how did that make you feel?" I asked. "Like I was making exactly the right decision," she replied, with surprising firmness. Because even in that moment, when I was returning his ring and calling off our wedding, he still didn't ask about my feelings or what I wanted. It was all about what I was losing, what I was giving up, as if I have no value beyond what the Reynolds name could give me. I nodded, understanding completely. That's very telling. Madison moved to the window, looking out at the now chaotic scene on the lawn. James Reynolds was addressing the guests, his expression grave, while Victoria stood beside him, a handkerchief pressed delicately to her eyes in a perfect tableau of distress. "They're announcing the cancellation," Madison observed, making it sound like a mutual decision due to unforeseen circumstances. She turned back to me, a hint of her old strength returning to her expression. "I should be out there. I should tell people the truth myself." "Are you sure that's what you want?" I asked, concerned about subjecting her to more stress. "You don't owe anyone an explanation today." "I owe myself one," she replied with quiet determination. "I've spent the last year becoming someone I don't recognize, someone I'm not proud of. It's time I started being honest again, with others and with myself." I felt a surge of pride as I watched her straighten her shoulders and smooth down her elaborate gown. "Then I'll be right beside you, if you want me there." For the first time that day, perhaps for the first time in months, Madison's smile reached her eyes. "I do want you there, Mom. I should never have let anyone push you to the sidelines of my life. That's my biggest regret in all of this." Together, we stepped out of the cottage and made our way across the lawn toward the gathered guests. Conversations hushed as people noticed our approach. James Reynolds stopped mid-sentence, his expression darkening when he saw us walking side by side. Madison stepped forward, her voice clear and strong as she addressed the crowd. "I want to thank everyone for coming today. As you've just been told, the wedding will not be taking place." Murmurs rippled through the audience, but Madison continued undeterred. "What you may not have been told is why. The truth is, I've spent the past year trying to become someone I'm not in order to fit into a world that was never going to fully accept me. In the process, I lost sight of who I really am and what truly matters." She reached back and took my hand, squeezing it tightly. I allowed the people I love most to be disrespected and pushed aside. I compromised my values for the sake of appearances. And I almost married a man who values status more than sincerity. Victoria Reynolds made a small, outraged sound, but Madison didn't falter. I apologize for any inconvenience or disappointment this causes. The reception will continue as planned. After all, my mother has paid for the venue and catering. This earned a few surprised laughs from the audience. Please enjoy the excellent food and beautiful surroundings. Consider it a celebration of authenticity rather than a wedding. With that, she turned and walked away from the stunned crowd, still holding my hand. Behind us, I could hear conversations erupting, the buzz of scandal and surprise washing over the assembled guests. "Where to now?" I asked as we reached the parking area. Madison considered for a moment, then smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that I hadn't seen in far too long. "Home," she said simply. "I think it's time I came home." The drive back to my house was quiet, both of us processing the extraordinary events of the day. Madison had changed out of her wedding gown into the simple sundress she'd arrived in that morning, her elaborate hairstyle now loosened into soft waves around her shoulders. She looked younger, more like herself, despite the emotional exhaustion evident in her eyes. As we pulled into my driveway, the familiar craftsman house welcoming us with its warm porch light, Madison broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. For how I treated you. For letting the Reynolds dictate our relationship. For losing myself so completely in their world." "You found your way back," I said gently. "That's what matters." Inside, the house was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Coffee, cup in the sink, newspaper folded on the counter, a half-read novel on the side table. Ordinary, authentic life, without pretense or performance. Madison moved through the room slowly, running her fingers along the bookshelves, studying the family photos I'd kept on display even when she'd been distancing herself from me. She paused in front of one particular image, Madison at her college graduation, beaming with pride as I stood beside her, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. "I remember this day," she said softly. "I felt like I could conquer the world." "You still can," I assured her, joining her by the photo wall. "One decision doesn't define your entire life, Maddie. Not the decision to get engaged to Ethan, and not the decision to end it either. You get to choose your path forward from here." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I don't even know where to begin. The Reynolds controlled so much of my life this past year, my job at their foundation, my apartment that they helped secure, my social circle that revolved around their connections." "You begin by remembering who you were before them," I said. "The talented, determined young woman who earned her master's degree and had ambitions of her own. What did you want before Ethan Reynolds came into your life?" Madison thought for a moment. "I wanted to work in educational policy reform. I had that fellowship offer from the Westridge Institute that I turned down when I got involved with Ethan." A spark of her old passion lit up her eyes. "I wonder if that position is still available." "There's only one way to find out," I said, smiling at the return of her initiative. "But that's a question for tomorrow. Tonight, I think we both need rest." As if on cue, my phone began buzzing with notifications, messages from guests, from friends who had heard about the dramatic non-wedding, from Olivia checking to make sure we were both okay. I silenced it and set it aside, unwilling to let the outside world intrude on this fragile moment of reconnection. "The gossip circuit is already in full swing," I observed wryly. Madison groaned, sinking onto the living room sofa. "I can only imagine what they're saying. The Reynolds will make sure their version of events becomes the accepted narrative." "Let them," I said, joining her on the couch. "People who matter will know the truth. And people who don't know the truth don't matter. She leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture so familiar from her childhood that it made my heart ache with nostalgia and relief. When did you get so wise, Mom? Around the same time I learned to stop caring what people like the Reynolds think of me, I replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. It's amazing how clarifying that can be. We ordered pizza for dinner, a deliberate departure from the gourmet meal that had been planned for the reception, and ate it directly, from the box while watching old movies, a tradition from Madison's teenage years that we had both missed without acknowledging it. As the evening wore on, I could see Madison gradually relaxing, shedding layers of the persona she'd constructed to please the Reynolds family. Her laugh became more natural, her gestures less controlled, her opinions more freely expressed. It was like watching someone emerge from a long hibernation, stretching and remembering how it felt to move without constraint. Around midnight, as we were clearing away the pizza box and empty ice cream containers, Madison paused, her expression suddenly serious. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you do it? After the divorce, I mean. How did you rebuild your life from scratch without compromising who you are? I considered the question carefully, recognizing its importance not just as a daughter seeking her mother's wisdom, but as a woman at a crossroads trying to chart her path forward. One day at a time, I answered honestly. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when taking the easy way out, going back to your father, accepting his terms, living in his shadow, seemed tempting. But I knew that version of me would slowly disappear until there was nothing left but a reflection of someone else's expectations. Madison nodded, absorbing my words. That's what was happening with Ethan, with the Reynolds. I was becoming a reflection, not a person. Exactly. So I focused on building something that was undeniably mine. The business became my anchor. Something I created that no one could take away or diminish. And raising you, of course. Watching you grow into your own person gave me purpose beyond myself. And now? Madison asked. What gives you purpose now that I'm grown and the business is established? It was a profound question, one I hadn't expected but found myself prepared to answer nonetheless. Living authentically, I said simply. Making choices based on my own values rather than others' judgments. Finding joy in both the extraordinary and the ordinary moments of my life. And nurturing the relationships that matter, like ours. Madison's eyes filled with tears, but they were different from the tears she'd shed earlier in the day. These weren't tears of confusion or distress, but of clarity and relief. I want that too, she whispered. I want to live authentically again. You will, I assured her, pulling her into a hug. Starting today, you already are. Later, as Madison settled into her old bedroom, unchanged since her college years, a deliberate preservation of her history that now seemed prescient, I sat alone in the kitchen, finally checking the flood of messages on my phone. Most were expressions of concern or support, particularly from those who had witnessed my impromptu speech at the reception. A few were more pointed inquiries, fishing for gossip or details about the dramatic collapse of the Mitchell-Reynolds wedding. The final message was from Carolyn Bennett, Ethan's aunt, who had shown me kindness when few others in the Reynolds circle had bothered. Congratulations on having the courage to speak your truth today. Even more, congratulations on raising a daughter who ultimately found the courage to speak hers. Some families measure success in acquisitions and appearances. Others measure it in authenticity and strength. By any meaningful metric, you and Madison are the true success story of the day. I smiled, saving her message while deleting most of the others. Caroline was right. By the metrics that actually mattered, today had been a triumph, not a disaster. Madison had chosen her authentic self over a life of comfortable pretense. She had recognized that no amount of status or wealth was worth the gradual erosion of her identity and values. And I had refused to be relegated to the background of, my daughter's life even when accepting that diminished role would have been easier than speaking up. In different ways, we had both reclaimed our power from those who sought to define us on their terms rather than our own. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Madison would need to rebuild aspects of her life that had become entangled with the Reynolds family. There would be awkward conversations, loose ends to tie up, new paths to forge. But tonight, I took comfort in knowing that whatever came next, we would face it together, mother and daughter, standing side by side rather than one behind the other. As I prepared for bed, I passed Madison's room and saw her silhouette by the window, looking out at the night sky. She had removed all traces of the elaborate styling from the wedding preparations and looked younger, more vulnerable, but also more herself than she had in months. "Good night, Maddie," I said softly from the doorway. "Tomorrow's a new day." She turned, offering me a smile that contained equal measures of exhaustion and hope. "A new beginning," she corrected gently. "Thank you for helping me find my way. Back to it." I nodded, understanding the profound truth in her words. Sometimes the most important journeys aren't to new destinations, but back to ourselves, to the core values and authentic identities we can lose sight of when dazzled by false promises of acceptance and belonging. As I drifted off to sleep that night, one thought remained clear in my mind. There are some things money truly cannot buy: integrity, self-respect, and the courage to stand up for both when they're threatened. No matter what came next for Madison or for me, we had reclaimed what mattered most. Everything else was just details. The morning after what the local society pages were already dubbing the Cedar Ridge debacle, I woke to the smell of coffee, brewing, and the soft clattering of dishes from the kitchen. For a disoriented moment, I thought I'd dreamed the events of the previous day: the back row seating, my unexpected speech, Madison's courageous decision to call off her wedding. But the reality settled over me as I reached for my phone and saw dozens of missed calls and unread messages. I slipped on my robe and padded downstairs to find Madison at the kitchen counter, her hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing an old Stanford sweatshirt I hadn't seen in years. She was methodically chopping fruit for a salad, her movements precise and focused. It was a habit she'd developed as a teenager. Cooking as therapy during times of stress or emotional turmoil. "Good morning," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning. I hope I didn't wake you. I couldn't sleep past 5, so I figured I might as well make breakfast." "You didn't wake me," I assured her, moving to the coffee pot and pouring myself a cup. "How are you feeling today?" Madison set down her knife and considered the question thoughtfully. "Lighter," she finally said. "Scared about what comes next, but lighter. Like I've put down a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. That's how truth feels sometimes. Terrifying but liberating. "The fallout is going to be brutal," she said, gesturing toward her own phone lying face down on the counter. "Victoria has already left 3 voicemails. Sophia, the wedding planner, sent an email about mitigation strategies for public relations. And Ethan?" She trailed off, her expression hardening slightly. "Ethan texted at 3 a.m. to tell me I'd made the biggest mistake of my life and would regret throwing away everything he could have given me." "Charming," I remarked dryly. "Nothing says, 'I love you' quite like threatening you with regret." That earned a genuine laugh from Madison, the first I'd heard in longer than I cared to admit. "Right? Not exactly making me second-guess my decision." She returned to her chopping, adding blueberries to the growing fruit salad. I also heard from 3 of my bridesmaids. 2 were surprisingly supportive. Lisa even said she'd been worried about me for months, that I seemed to be fading away the longer I was with Ethan. "And the 3rd?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Courtney Reynolds, Ethan's cousin," Madison said with a wry smile. She informed me I've been officially excommunicated from their social circle and that I shouldn't bother showing my face at any event where respectable people gather. She shrugged, affecting more nonchalance than I knew she felt. So much for my thriving social calendar. I watched my daughter carefully, recognizing the brittle edge to her humor. Behind the brave front, she was hurting. Not because she missed Ethan or regretted her decision, but because rejection stings even when it comes from people whose approval you no longer seek. Their loss, I said simply, joining her at the counter and picking up a spare knife to help with the fruit. And for what it's worth, I don't think you'll find yourself lacking for invitations once the dust settles. People respect authenticity, even if they're initially shocked by it. Madison glanced at me sideways. Is that what happened after your divorce from Dad? Did people respect your authenticity? Eventually, I admitted. Not immediately. First, there was plenty of judgment and whispered speculation. Your father was quite skilled at controlling the narrative, making himself the wronged party despite being the one who'd repeatedly broken our marriage vows. I remember, Madison said quietly. The way his friends treated you at my high school graduation. Like you were the villain in their story. I hadn't realized she'd noticed that, had tried so hard to shield her from the uglier aspects of the divorce. People believe what they want to believe, especially when the truth is uncomfortable. But over time, actions speak louder than words. I built my business, raised you well, and lived according to my values. That earned respect that gossip couldn't diminish. She considered this, absently twirling a strawberry stem between her fingers. I hope you're right. Right now, it feels like I've burned every bridge I've built over the past 3 years. Some bridges need burning, I told her gently, especially when they lead somewhere you no longer want to go. We finished preparing breakfast together, working in comfortable synchronicity that reminded me of simpler times. As we ate on the back patio, the morning sun warming our faces, Madison began tentatively sharing plans for her immediate future. I think I'll call Dr. Westridge today, she said, referring to the director of the Educational Policy Institute that had once offered her a fellowship. Best case scenario, the position is still open. Worst case, she might know of similar opportunities. That sounds like an excellent place to start, I agreed. And living arrangements. Madison looked momentarily uncertain. I'll need to clear out my apartment downtown. Ethan's name isn't on the lease, but his family's foundation subsidized the rent as part of my compensation package when I worked. For them. She sighed, pushing a piece of melon around her plate, which means I technically can't afford it on my own. You know you're welcome here for as long as you need, I said. No rush to figure everything out at once. Thanks, Mom. She hesitated, then added, There's something else I've been thinking about. Something I might need your advice on, professionally speaking. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Oh. When I was working at the Reynolds Foundation, I developed a pilot program for bringing tech education to underserved schools. It was actually quite successful. Test scores improved and student engagement went through the roof. But when I left, well, let's just say they're not continuing the program. Without me. I could hear the disappointment in her voice, the investment she'd made in work that mattered to her. That's unfortunate. It sounds like a valuable initiative. It was, Madison agreed, animation entering her voice for the first time that morning. And I've been thinking, what if I could develop it independently? Create my own nonprofit or educational consultancy focused on technology access and education in underserved communities. I felt a surge of pride seeing this spark of passion reignite in my daughter. This was the Madison I knew, visionary, compassionate, driven by purpose rather than prestige. That sounds like a perfect application of your skills and interests, I said. And speaking purely as a business advisor, There are numerous grant opportunities and potential corporate partnerships for initiatives like that. Madison's eyes lit up, her mind clearly racing with possibilities. I'd need to build a proper business model, secure initial funding, establish partnerships with schools. She trailed off, suddenly looking overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was contemplating. One step at a time, I reminded her. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was Evergreen Solutions. She nodded, then gave me a curious look. How did you do it, Mom? Starting over from scratch, building something that was entirely your own? It was a profound question, one that took me back to those early days after my divorce from Richard. Days filled with uncertainty, fear, and a desperate determination to create security for myself and my daughter. I focused on what I knew I could control, I said after a thoughtful pause. My expertise, my work ethic, my integrity. Everything else, other people's opinions, market fluctuations, competitors, I acknowledged, but refused to be derailed by. Madison absorbed this, nodding slowly. Control what you can, accept what you can't. Exactly. And remember that starting over isn't the same as starting from nothing. You have education, experience, connections of your own that have nothing to do with the Reynolds family. Most importantly, you have perspective that you didn't have before. Perspective on what not to do, you mean? She said with a rueful smile. That's valuable too, I assured her. Some of the most important business lessons I've learned came from mistakes or false starts. Our conversation was interrupted by the chiming of the doorbell. Madison tensed immediately, her gaze darting toward the front of the house. Expecting someone? She asked, voice tight with anxiety. I shook my head. Probably just a delivery. But even as I said it, I felt a flutter of uneasiness. The timing was too coincidental after yesterday's events. I moved to the front door and checked the security camera feed on my phone. Standing on the porch was James Reynolds himself, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the morning sunlight. There was no sign of Victoria or Ethan, just James, shifting his weight from foot to foot with uncharacteristic nervousness. It's James Reynolds, I told Madison, who had followed me into the hallway. Just him, no one else. Her face paled slightly. What could he possibly want? Only one way to find out, I replied, though I placed a protective hand on her arm. You don't have to see him if you don't want to. Madison squared her shoulders, looking more like her old self than she had in months. No, I should face this. We both should. I nodded, proud of her resolve, and opened the door. James Reynolds looked markedly different from the confident, commanding figure who had dominated the wedding events. His normally impeccable appearance showed signs of haste, his collar slightly crooked, his silver hair less perfectly combed. More striking were his eyes, which held an unfamiliar uncertainty as they moved from my face to Madison's. Eleanor, he acknowledged with a tight nod. Madison, I hope I'm not interrupting your morning. That depends entirely on the purpose of your visit, I replied, neither welcoming nor dismissing him outright. He cleared his throat. May I come in? What I have to say would be better discussed privately. I looked to Madison, leaving the decision to her. After a brief hesitation, she stepped back, silently inviting him to enter. I led the way to the living room, deliberately choosing seats that positioned Madison and me together on the sofa, while James took the armchair across from us. The power dynamic was subtle but intentional. He was on our territory now, not the other way around. I'll be direct, James began, his business-like tone at odds with the unusual circumstance. Yesterday's events have created a complicated situation, one that requires immediate damage control. Madison tensed beside me. If you've come to convince me I made a mistake... James held up a hand, surprising us both by interrupting. No, that's not why I'm here. He exhaled heavily. looking suddenly older than his 60-some years. "I'm here because, regardless of personal feelings, there are practical matters that need addressing." "Such as?" I prompted when he didn't immediately continue. "Such as the fact that numerous wedding gifts have already been received and will need to be returned, such as the honeymoon arrangements that must be canceled, such as the press inquiries that have been flooding our office since yesterday afternoon." He leaned forward slightly. "And such is the matter of your financial contribution to the wedding, Eleanor." Ah, there it was. The real reason for his visit. "What about my contribution?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral despite the spark of anger his words ignited. "You paid for the venue and catering directly," he stated. $75,000 if I recall correctly. "That's right." "Given that the wedding did not occur and that the reception continued as an ordinary party, there may be partial refunds available from the vendors. Victoria and I believe those should rightfully be returned to you." I studied his face, searching for the hidden agenda behind this unexpected display of fairness. James, Reynolds had never struck me as a man concerned with financial justice, particularly when it might benefit someone outside his immediate circle. "That's thoughtful of you," I replied cautiously. "Though I'm curious why you felt the need to deliver this message in person when it could have been handled through the wedding planner or even email." James shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "There are additional considerations." He turned his attention to Madison. "Your employment with the Reynolds Foundation, for one. While your position was technically independent of your relationship with Ethan, the circumstances of your departure create awkwardness that cannot be ignored." Madison raised her chin slightly. "Are you firing me, Mr. Reynolds?" "I'm offering you a dignified resignation," he corrected, "with a generous severance package and a professional reference that focuses solely on your work performance, which has been exemplary." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "The details are outlined here. 3 months' salary as severance, continued health coverage through the end of the year, and a letter of recommendation for your next position." Madison accepted the envelope without opening it, her expression carefully controlled. "And in exchange?" James met her gaze directly. "Discretion. A mutual agreement to discuss the end of your engagement in neutral, respectful terms. No public accusations or assignments of blame from either party." I couldn't help but admire the cold efficiency of his approach. This wasn't about doing right by Madison. It was about containing potential damage to the Reynolds family reputation. "Is Ethan aware you're here?" Madison asked, cutting directly to the heart of the matter. A flicker of discomfort crossed James's face. "My son is processing yesterday's events in his own way. Victoria and I felt it prudent to address the practical concerns without delay." "In other words, he's sulking and you're cleaning up his mess," I observed, unable to completely suppress my disdain. James's expression hardened momentarily, then relaxed into something more resigned. "Families are complicated, Eleanor. I'm sure you understand that better than most." The loaded comment hung in the air between us, its implications clear. A reference to my own complicated family history with Richard, perhaps, or simply an acknowledgement that parents often find themselves managing the consequences of their children's actions. Madison broke the tense silence. "I appreciate the severance offer, Mr. Reynolds, and I have no interest in a public battle over what happened yesterday. That wouldn't serve any purpose." Relief visibly washed over James's features. "I'm glad to hear that. Victoria will be pleased as well. However," Madison continued, her voice gaining strength, "I won't participate in any narrative that paints my decision as impulsive or irrational. If asked, I'll simply say that Ethan and I realized we wanted different things from our relationship, and mutually agreed to part ways before making a commitment neither of us was ready for." It was a gracious offer, far more generous than the Reynolds family deserved after their treatment of her. I felt another surge of pride in my daughters. Inherent dignity. James considered her terms, then nodded. That seems fair. He rose from his seat, clearly eager to conclude this uncomfortable mission. There's one more item to address. The ring. Madison gestured toward her bare left hand. I left it at Cedar Ridge yesterday, in the bridal cottage. Sophia has it. Ah, good. James seemed momentarily thrown by the straightforward resolution of what he'd clearly anticipated would be a delicate negotiation. Well then, I believe that covers the essential matters. Not quite, I interjected, rising to stand beside Madison. There's the matter of the tech education program my daughter developed for underserved schools. I understand it's being discontinued, now that she's leaving the foundation. James blinked, clearly surprised by this shift in conversation. The pilot program was successful, yes, but without Madison's direct oversight. The program doesn't need my oversight, Madison interrupted, a new confidence in her voice. It needs the foundation's continued funding and support. The curriculum is already developed, the partnerships with schools established. There's no reason to deny those children ongoing access to educational resources simply because I'm no longer affiliated with the Reynolds name. James studied her with newfound interest, perhaps seeing for the first time the capable professional beneath the polished exterior his family had cultivated. You feel strongly about this. I do, Madison affirmed. Those students deserve better than to become collateral damage in our personal situation. A long moment passed as James appeared to recalculate his assessment of both Madison and the conversation's direction. Finally, he nodded. I'll speak with the board about continuing the program. No promises, but your point is well taken. Thank you, Madison said simply. As I walked James to the door, he paused on the threshold, an uncharacteristic hesitation in his manner. Eleanor, he said, his voice lowered so Madison couldn't hear from the living room. For what it's worth, I underestimated you. Both of you. It wasn't quite an apology, but from a man like James Reynolds it was as close as one might ever get. Most people do, I replied evenly. It's an advantage in its way. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Indeed. He straightened. His jacket. Good day, Eleanor. Goodbye, James. As the door closed behind him, I felt a curious sense of closure. Not just regarding the wedding that wasn't, but to a chapter of Madison's life that had diverted her from her authentic path. James's visit, with its focus on practical matters and dignified dissolution, had drawn a line under the Reynolds chapter more effectively than any emotional confrontation could have. I returned to the living room to find Madison opening the envelope James had left, scanning its contents with a clinical detachment that would have been impossible for her just 24 hours earlier. Everything as promised? I asked. She nodded. 3 months severance, health insurance through December, and a surprisingly glowing letter of recommendation. She looked up, a hint of genuine amusement in her eyes. He calls me an innovative thinker with exceptional project management, skills and the rare ability to transform abstract concepts into actionable programs. Not bad for someone who just left his son at the altar. I smiled, joining her on the sofa. Well, he's not wrong about your professional capabilities. You are exceptional at what you do. Thanks to you, Madison said, setting the papers aside. You taught me how to be taken seriously in rooms full of people who underestimate women by default. I gave you some tools, I corrected gently, but your success has always been your own. Don't let anyone, including me, take credit for what you've accomplished through your own intelligence and hard work. Madison leaned back against the cushions, looking thoughtful. It's strange. When James was talking about the education program, something shifted. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, advocating for something I believe in, standing my ground professionally. It was like waking up. That's what happens when you reconnect with your purpose, I told her. It centers you, reminds you who you really are beneath all the roles and expectations others place on you. I want to feel that way again, she said with quiet determination. All the time, not just in flashes. You will, I assured her. It takes time to find your footing after a major life change, but you're already taking steps in the right direction. Madison glanced at her phone, which had been buzzing periodically throughout our conversation. Speaking of steps, Dr. Westridge emailed back. She wants to meet for coffee tomorrow to discuss potential opportunities. A genuine smile spread across her face. She said she was delighted to hear from me. That's wonderful news, I said warmly. The first of many doors reopening, I suspect. I hope so. Madison hesitated, then added, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about my idea for an independent educational initiative. I think I want to explore that further. Not immediately, perhaps, but as a longer-term goal. Whenever you're ready to develop that plan, I'm happy to help in whatever way I can, I offered. Business planning, potential investors, networking. My resources are at your disposal. I appreciate that, Madison said. But I also need to do this on my own terms, build something that's truly mine without shortcuts or special advantages. I recognized in her words the same fierce independence that had driven me after my divorce. The determination to create success that no one could attribute to connections or privilege. I respect that completely, I told her. Independence doesn't mean refusing support, though. It means making your own decisions about what support to accept, and on what terms. She considered this, then nodded slowly. That's a fair distinction. Our conversation was interrupted by the chiming of my own phone, Olivia, calling for what was undoubtedly an update on the post-wedding situation. I excused myself to take the call, giving Madison some space to process the morning's developments. Please tell me James Reynolds didn't actually show up at your house, Olivia demanded without preamble when I answered. I laughed, moving into the kitchen for privacy. News travels fast. Yes, he was just here. The audacity, after the way they treated you, after everything that happened. Olivia's indignation was palpable even through the phone. What did he want? To blame you for ruining their precious society event? Actually, no, I admitted, still somewhat surprised by the civil nature of the visit. He came to arrange Madison's severance package from the foundation and to ensure the return of my venue payment. It was all very businesslike. Huh. Olivia sounded as perplexed as I had felt. That's unexpectedly decent of him. Decent is stretching it, I clarified. It was damage control, pure and simple. The Reynolds family reputation is built on appearing above reproach in all matters, financial and otherwise. James was just ensuring no loose ends could come back to haunt them. Still, Olivia mused, it's better than the scorched earth response I was expecting. How's Madison handling everything? I glanced toward the living room, where I could see my daughter typing rapidly on her laptop, already immersed in whatever next steps she was planning. Better than I could have hoped. There's a resilience there that reminds me why we get through difficult times, not just surviving them, but emerging stronger. She has her mother's backbone, Olivia observed warmly, though she temporarily misplaced it. We all lose our way sometimes, I said, thinking not just of Madison, but of my own journey through the years. The important thing is finding the path back to yourself. After finishing my call with Olivia, I rejoined Madison in the living room. She looked up from her laptop with a determined expression I hadn't seen in far too long. I've been making a list, she announced. Things I need to handle this week. Apartment, job search, returning my portion of the wedding gifts, and things. I want to focus on moving forward, professional goals, personal development, rebuilding relationships that got sidelined while I was with Ethan. That sounds like an excellent framework, I said, settling into the chair opposite her. Practical? necessities balanced with longer-term aspirations. I also added one immediate priority, Madison continued, her expression softening. Making up for lost time with you, Mom. I let the Reynolds family dictate too much of my life, including my relationship with you. That stops now. Her words touched me deeply, though I tried not to show just how much. I'd like that very much, I said simply. Madison closed her laptop and set it aside, her expression turning reflective. You know what I keep thinking about? That moment yesterday when you stood up and spoke the truth about how you'd been treated. When you refused to be pushed into the background of your own daughter's wedding day. I nodded, remembering the surge of clarity and determination that had propelled me to my feet in that moment. That took incredible courage, Madison continued, and dignity. You didn't lash out or make a scene just for the sake of drama. You simply stated facts and reclaimed your rightful place. She looked at me with newfound appreciation. I want to be more like that, truthful without being cruel, strong without being bitter. You already are, I assured her. Yesterday proved that. When faced with the choice between comfortable pretense and difficult authenticity, you chose the harder, braver path. The weeks following Madison's canceled wedding unfolded in a rhythm of endings and beginnings. True to her organized nature, she methodically worked through her list of practical tasks, emptying her downtown apartment, returning wedding gifts with gracious notes, and tying up loose ends at the Reynolds Foundation. I gave her space to navigate these transitions, offering support when needed, but careful not to overstep. This was her journey of reclamation, and I understood the importance of her finding her own way through it. One rainy Tuesday morning, about a month after the wedding that wasn't, I came downstairs to find Madison at the kitchen table surrounded by documents, a focused intensity in her expression I hadn't seen in months. Good morning, I said, moving to the coffee maker. You're up early. She glanced up with a quick smile. Couldn't sleep? Too many ideas spinning in my head. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, observing the organized chaos spread across the table, financial projections, curriculum outlines, and what appeared to be grant application requirements. Making progress on your independent education initiative? I asked. Madison nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Dr. Westridge connected me with the Portland Education Coalition. They're looking for someone to develop a comprehensive tech curriculum for their after-school programs in underserved neighborhoods. That sounds perfect for you, I observed, genuinely pleased at how quickly opportunities were aligning with her renewed sense of purpose. It's not a full-time position, Madison clarified, more of a contracted project, but it would allow me to test some of my ideas while I develop the broader nonprofit concept. She hesitated, then added, and it would give me income without needing to dip into my savings too quickly. I understood her unspoken concern. Financial independence had always been important to Madison, even more so now that she'd witnessed firsthand how economic leverage could be used to control and manipulate. Smart approach, I said, joining her at the table. Build credentials and cash flow simultaneously while working toward your larger vision. I learned from the best, Madison replied with a warm glance my direction. How many times did I hear you talk about strategic stepping stones when you were building Evergreen? I laughed, remembering those early years of my business when every client contract was carefully evaluated not just for immediate revenue, but for how it positioned us for future growth. You were paying attention during those dinner table business lessons. More than you know, Madison admitted. Watching you build something meaningful from scratch gave me a blueprint I didn't even realize I was absorbing. She gestured to the papers before her, including how to create a solid business plan before seeking funding. I picked up one of the documents, a detailed analysis of similar educational technology programs across the country, complete with outcome metrics and sustainability factors. The thoroughness impressed me. This wasn't a passion project built on idealism alone, but a thoughtfully constructed plan with practical considerations at its core. "This is excellent work," I told her, scanning the market analysis. "You've identified a genuine need and a creative approach to addressing it." Madison's eyes lit up with the particular energy that comes from sharing work you believe in with someone whose opinion you value. "The key innovation is the partnership model," she explained, pulling forward another document. "Instead of relying solely on grants or donations, we'd create a tiered system where higher-income schools pay for premium versions of the curriculum and technology. That revenue subsidizes free implementation in schools that can't afford to pay." "Sustainable social entrepreneurship," I nodded approvingly. "The best of both worlds. Mission-driven, but self-sustaining." Exactly. Madison's enthusiasm was infectious, reminding me of the passionate, purposeful young woman who had graduated from Stanford with big dreams before the Reynolds influence had temporarily dimmed that light. "I've got a meeting with the coalition next week to discuss the contracted project, but I'm also using that as an opportunity to get feedback on this larger concept. They'd be foolish not to jump at the chance to work with you," I said, meaning every word. Madison had always been exceptional, intellectually sharp, emotionally intelligent, and driven by genuine conviction. It was these very qualities that had attracted the Reynolds family to her initially, though they had subsequently tried to redirect those strengths toward maintaining their social standing, rather than creating meaningful change. Madison gathered her papers into a neater stack, her expression turning more reflective. "You know what's strange? If you had asked me 6 months ago, I would have said I was happy, excited about the wedding, about joining the Reynolds family, about my future with Ethan. I believed it myself." "That's not strange at all," I assured her. "We're remarkably good at convincing ourselves that what we have is what we want, especially when admitting otherwise would require difficult changes. I guess I just never thought I'd be susceptible to that kind of self-deception," Madison admitted. "I always prided myself on being clear-eyed and independent." "We all have blind spots," I said gently, "particularly when it comes to relationships. The Reynolds offered belonging, validation, a clear path forward. Those are powerful attractions, especially when they're wrapped in the guise of love." Madison considered this, absently tracing the edge of a paper with her fingertip. "Ethan called yesterday," she said after a moment. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I felt a flicker of concern. "Oh?" "It was unexpected. Especially since his last communication was that 3 a.m. text telling me I'd made the biggest mistake of my life." She shook her head, still seeming surprised by the conversation. "He actually apologized, said he'd been reflecting on his behavior, and realized he had tried to mold me into his family's expectations rather than appreciating who I really am. That's unusually self-aware for him," I observed cautiously. "That's what I thought, too," Madison agreed. "At first, I wondered if it was just another manipulation tactic, but he seemed genuinely regretful, especially about how they treated you at the wedding." She paused, then added, "He even admitted his mother had orchestrated most of the seating and scheduling decisions specifically to minimize your role." While this confirmation of Victoria Reynolds' deliberate exclusion tactics wasn't surprising, hearing it acknowledged was oddly validating. "Did he give any indication of what prompted this sudden insight?" Madison smiled wryly. "Apparently Caroline Bennett, his aunt who was kind to you at the engagement party, had some choice words for the entire family after the wedding, called them out for their appalling treatment of both of us, and told them they were perpetuating everything that's wrong with entitled wealth." I couldn't help but smile, imagining that conversation. Caroline had struck me as the rare truth-teller in the Reynolds orbit, someone who recognized the family's flaws without being co-opted into their carefully maintained facade of perfection. "Good for her," I said. "It takes courage to speak uncomfortable truths to your own family." She also apparently told Ethan that he dodged a bullet because I was too good for him anyway. Madison's tone was light, but I could see that the validation from an unexpected ally had meant something to her. A woman of excellent judgment, I remarked, earning a genuine laugh from my daughter. Anyway, Madison continued, Ethan asked if we could meet for coffee sometime. He said he'd like to apologize in person and have a proper conversation about everything that happened. I studied her expression, looking for signs of lingering attachment or confusion, but saw only calm, clarity. And how do you feel about that? She considered the question carefully. I'm not interested in rekindling anything romantic, she said firmly. That chapter is closed. But there's something appealing about the possibility of resolution, a conversation where we both acknowledge what went wrong without anger or defensiveness. Closure can be valuable, I agreed, as long as you're clear on your boundaries. Crystal clear, Madison assured me. In fact, that's one of the things I've been working on with Dr. Levine. She'd started seeing a therapist 2 weeks after the wedding, a decision I had quietly applauded. Understanding where my boundaries should have been with Ethan, with the Reynolds family, even with you, Mom. I raised an eyebrow, encouraging her to elaborate on that last point. Not in a negative way, she clarified quickly. But I've realized that part of why I was vulnerable to the Reynolds influence was that I've always been eager to please authority figures, to seek approval. That started with you and Dad, both of you such strong personalities with high expectations. It was a fair observation, and one that demonstrated genuine self-reflection. We did set high standards, I acknowledged, though I hope we also celebrated your unique strengths rather than trying to mold you into predetermined expectations. You did, Madison said warmly, but I still internalized this idea that my worth was tied to achievement, to meeting or exceeding others' standards. The Reynolds exploited that, especially Victoria. She'd praise me lavishly when I conformed to their expectations and withdraw approval completely when I didn't. I nodded, recognizing the manipulation technique. Classic conditioning. Intermittent. Reinforcement is particularly effective at controlling behavior. Exactly. Dr. Levine helped me see that pattern. Madison gathered her papers into a neat folder, her movements deliberate and composed. Anyway, I told Ethan I'd think about meeting. I haven't decided yet. You'll make the right decision for you, I said with confidence. I trust your judgment, now more than ever. Madison smiled at that, a full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. That means a lot, Mom, especially coming from you. The conversation shifted to plans for the day, but I found myself reflecting on Madison's journey over the past month. The growth I was witnessing wasn't just a return to her former self, but an evolution into someone more grounded, more self-aware, more deliberately intentional about her choices. In a strange way, the painful experience with the Reynolds family had accelerated her personal development, forcing her to confront questions of identity and autonomy earlier than she might have otherwise. Later that afternoon, I returned from a meeting with a potential client to find a sleek black car parked in my driveway. My first thought was that Ethan had ignored Madison's request for time to consider his invitation and shown up unannounced, a boundary violation that would confirm my worst suspicions about his supposed growth. But as I approached, the driver's door opened to reveal Caroline Bennett, Ethan's aunt who had apparently become an unexpected ally in the aftermath of the wedding. Eleanor, she greeted me with a warm smile. I hope you don't mind the surprise visit. I tried calling, but it went to voicemail. Caroline, I responded, genuinely pleased to see her. This is unexpected, but not unwelcome. Would you like to come in? If it's not an imposition, she said, following me toward the house. I'm in Portland just for the day on foundation business and wanted to check in on Madison. And you, of course. Inside, I offered her tea in the living room, curious about the real purpose behind her visit. While Caroline had shown herself to be different from the rest of the Reynolds circle, spontaneous social calls weren't typical in our worlds without specific purpose. "Madison's not home at the moment," I explained, pouring tea into delicate cups I rarely used. "She's meeting with a former professor about some educational initiatives she's developing." "That sounds promising," Caroline said, accepting her cup with a nod of thanks. I've always thought her work in educational technology was impressive, far more meaningful than the superficial society events Victoria kept pushing her toward. I smiled, appreciating the candid assessment. Madison is quite talented when she's able to focus on her genuine interests. Caroline set her cup down, her expression turning more serious. "That's actually related to why I'm here, Eleanor. There's something I thought Madison should know, and you as well. It concerns the education program she developed at the Reynolds Foundation." My interest sharpened immediately. "Oh?" "James told Madison he would speak to the board about continuing the program, correct?" I nodded, recalling that particular negotiation point from James's visit after the wedding. "Well, he did speak to them," Caroline confirmed, "and they voted unanimously to continue funding, with one significant adjustment. They're renaming it the Reynolds Technical Education Initiative and removing all reference to Madison as its creator." I felt a surge of indignation on Madison's behalf. They're erasing her contribution entirely? "Not entirely," Caroline clarified. "Her name appears in the fine print of the materials as initial program developer, but the public-facing elements presented as Victoria's brainchild, with James as the primary champion." "That's unconscionable," I said, not bothering to hide my disgust. "Madison developed that program from the ground up. The curriculum design, the partnership structure, the assessment metrics, all of it was her work." Caroline nodded grimly. "I know. I was on the advisory committee when she first proposed it. Victoria showed minimal interest then. In fact, she questioned whether technology education was really a core priority for the Foundation's mission. And now she's claiming it as her own," I concluded, understanding perfectly the calculated appropriation taking place. A convenient addition to her philanthropic portfolio. "Precisely." Caroline took a sip of her tea, studying me over the rim of her cup. "There's more. The Foundation is submitting the program for the Marsden Innovation Award in Education. It's quite prestigious in philanthropic circles, with significant grant money attached. The implications were clear. Not only were they taking credit for Madison's work, but they were potentially going to be lauded and rewarded for it. The injustice was breathtaking in its audacity. "Madison should know about this," I said firmly. "I agree, which is why I'm here." Caroline set down her cup. "But I wanted to speak with you first because there's another angle to consider. Given Madison's current focus on developing her own independent initiative, this situation could potentially be leveraged to her advantage." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her thinking. "How so?" "The Reynolds family values appearance above all else," Caroline explained, echoing my own assessment of their priorities. "They would be mortified if the truth about the program's origin became widely known, especially in educational circles where Madison is building her new professional identity." I caught her implication immediately. "You're suggesting Madison could use this as negotiating leverage?" Caroline smiled, clearly pleased at how quickly I'd understood. "Exactly. Not in a threatening or vindictive way. That would only backfire. But a straightforward conversation about equitable recognition and possible collaboration could yield results beneficial to her current endeavors." It was an elegantly strategic approach, turning what could have been merely infuriating news into a potential opportunity. I found myself respecting Caroline's practical intelligence even more. "May I ask why you're doing this?" I inquired, genuinely curious about her motivations. "The Reynolds are your family, after all." Caroline's expression turned contemplative. The Reynolds are my relatives, she corrected gently. Family to me implies shared values and mutual respect, not just shared DNA. I've spent decades watching James and Victoria craft an increasingly artificial existence based on status and appearances. It's exhausting, frankly. After Caroline left, I shared everything with Madison when she returned home. Her reaction evolved quickly from outrage to strategic calculation, true to her nature. Together, we crafted a plan that would address the appropriation of her work while potentially opening doors for her new venture. 6 months later, I stood in the back of a crowded auditorium at Portland State University, watching Madison deliver the keynote address at an educational technology conference. The audience, a mix of educators, tech innovators, and potential funders, listened intently as she outlined her vision for democratizing access to technology, education across socioeconomic divides. The Mitchell Education Technology Initiative is built on a simple premise, she explained, her voice confident and clear, that every child deserves access to the tools and knowledge that will define their future opportunities, regardless of zip code or family income. I smiled at the name of her organization, a subtle but meaningful reclamation of her identity and work. The Mitchell Initiative, as it was coming to be known in educational circles, had launched 3 months earlier with seed funding from an unexpected source, the Reynolds Foundation. Madison's negotiation with James and the board had been a masterclass in strategic diplomacy. Armed with Caroline's information and her own meticulous documentation, she had presented them with a solution that preserved everyone's dignity while ensuring proper recognition of her contributions. The Reynolds Technical Education Program would continue under that name, with Madison acknowledged as its creator and founding developer. In return, the foundation would provide initial funding for Madison's independent initiative, positioned publicly as a strategic partnership expanding upon proven methodologies. Victoria had been reportedly furious at first, but James, ever the pragmatist, recognized the elegant solution for what it was: an opportunity to resolve a potentially embarrassing situation while simultaneously associating the Reynolds name with innovative educational philanthropy. As Madison concluded her presentation to enthusiastic applause, I felt a profound sense of pride, not just in her professional accomplishments, but in the personal growth that had brought her to this moment. The woman commanding attention on that stage was fully herself, confident in her expertise, clear in her purpose, unburdened by others' expectations. After the formal program ended, I made my way through the crowd toward Madison, who was engaged in animated conversation with several attendees. When she spotted me, her face lit up with a genuine smile that reached her eyes, the kind of unguarded expression I hadn't seen regularly during her time with Ethan. "Mom, what did you think?" she asked as I reached her side. "Absolutely brilliant," I said truthfully. "You had them hanging on every word." She introduced me to the small group around her, a school district superintendent, 2 tech entrepreneurs interested in educational applications, and a representative from a major foundation. I noted with quiet satisfaction how she presented herself, not as someone seeking validation or approval, but as a knowledgeable peer bringing valuable insights to the table. Later, over dinner at our favorite local restaurant, Madison shared news that the Mitchell Initiative had been invited to develop pilot programs in 3 additional school districts based on the success of their initial implementation. "We're going to need to hire more staff," she said, excitement evident in her voice. Dr. Westridge suggested 2 of her recent graduates who specialized in educational technology. "And we'll need more office space. We've already outgrown the incubator." "Sweet. Growing pains of the best kind," I observed, raising my glass in a small toast. "To scaling meaningful impact." Madison clinked her glass against mine, then paused, her expression turning reflective. "I've been thinking a lot about that day at Cedar Ridge," she said, referring to her canceled wedding. "How different my life would be now if you hadn't stood up and spoken your truth." You would have found your way eventually, I said, believing it completely. Your authentic self was too strong to remain suppressed. Indefinitely. Maybe, she acknowledged. But it might have taken years, not months. And by then, I might have been too entangled in the Reynolds world to break free cleanly. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. Your courage gave me permission to find my own. I was touched by her words, though I still saw my actions that day as a simple reclamation of dignity rather than any great act of bravery. Sometimes the most important thing we can do for the people we love is model what it looks like to value ourselves, I said after a moment. Everything else flows from that foundation. Madison nodded thoughtfully. I see that now. In retrospect, it seems so obvious that I was losing myself in the Reynolds expectations. But at the time, it felt like I was just adapting, evolving. The line between growth and erasure can be remarkably thin. Indeed it can, I agreed. The crucial difference lies in whether the change is guided by your own values or imposed by others' judgments. Our conversation drifted to plans for the coming months. A possible expansion of the Mitchell Initiative to rural communities, a weekend trip to the coast we'd been postponing. The book group Madison had recently joined as part of her effort to rebuild connections outside of professional contexts. As we talked, I was struck by the easy comfort between us, the natural rhythm of two adults who respected each other deeply while maintaining healthy boundaries. The wedding debacle, painful, as it had been in the moment, had ultimately strengthened rather than damaged our relationship. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you, Madison said as we finished dessert. Ethan is engaged again, to Clarissa Worthington. You remember her from the wedding? Tall blonde. Family owns that chain of luxury hotels. That was fast, I remarked, genuinely surprised. It had been barely 6 months since Madison had returned his ring. Madison shrugged, remarkably unbothered by the news. Caroline says Victoria orchestrated the whole thing. Apparently, Clarissa's family connections are even more impressive than their wealth, which makes her the perfect Reynolds acquisition. And how do you feel about it? I asked carefully. Honestly? Madison considered the question. Relieved. For myself, obviously, it confirms I made the right decision, but also, strangely, for Ethan. At my questioning look, she elaborated. He and Clarissa are actually well matched in their priorities. She wants exactly what the Reynolds family offers: status, connections, a certain kind of life. She won't experience the fundamental conflict I did, trying to reshape myself to fit their mold. I marveled at the maturity of her perspective. The ability to wish well for someone who had hurt her. Recognizing that different people seek different things from life and relationships. You've come a long way in 6 months, I observed. We both have, Madison replied warmly. Who would have thought that being seated in the back row at my own wedding would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me? I laughed. At her framing, appreciating the irony. Life rarely follows the seating chart we expect. Thank goodness for that, my daughter said, raising her glass once more. To unexpected redirections, and to having the courage to follow them. As we drove home that evening, the city lights reflecting off the rain-slicked streets, I found myself filled with quiet gratitude for the journey we had traveled together. The wedding that wasn't had ultimately given us something far more valuable than any ceremony could have provided, a renewed understanding of who we were individually and together, a recommitment to authenticity over appearance, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when faced with the choice between comfortable, pretense and difficult truth, we had both chosen the path of integrity. Some might have seen the events of the past months as a failure or embarrassment, but driving beside my daughter in the gentle Portland rain, I recognized them for what they truly were: a liberation, a reclamation, and a powerful reminder that the most meaningful place in anyone's life isn't defined by where you're seated at a wedding, but by the courage with which you speak your truth and the authenticity with which you live your values. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.